Orlando Bloom gets to spend the rest of his life telling people that he was in one of the greatest trilogies of all time. A group of obnoxiously long films that span a vast world and send him on a quest with a group of some of the greatest characters of all time to assist in destroying an important piece of equipment to prevent the ultimate evil in the world from becoming more powerful. And if you think I'm talking about The Lord of the Rings, you must not have read the title. Because I'm talking about Pirates of the Caribbean, baby. One of the best trilogies of all time. A better trilogy than The Lord of the Rings. Sue me, but it's objectively true. And similar to my Transformers series that I've been doing, these videos will each give an in-depth look at one film in the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise. But unlike Transformers, where I'm not talking about certain films, I will be going through the entire series. So I'm starting with Curse of the Black Pearl, going into Dead Man's Chest. I have a couple special videos planned for At World's End, and then whether I take a break or not, I'm not sure, but I will be talking about On Stranger Tides and Dead Men Tell No Tales. I've always sort of been an apologist for that movie. I still think it's the worst of the 5, but I think it's better than a lot of people remember it to be. But for now, I'm covering Gore Verbinski's original Pirates trilogy, Curse of the Black Pearl, Dead Man's Chest, and At World's End. These 3 films right here. The story of Will Turner and Elizabeth Swann. Because even though Jack Sparrow and Johnny Depp are the face of these movies, this story is mostly about Will Turner and Elizabeth Swann. But before this was a trilogy, it was just one movie. One movie based on a theme park ride of the same name. Pirates of the Caribbean, and I have a funny relationship with this movie and this series as a whole. I saw one scene of the 3rd film when I was little, and it was really weird. And I was like, I'm not gonna watch these movies. And then one day my mom and I were looking for something to watch, and we realized that we have a copy of Curse of the Black Pearl for some reason that we got from the library as a discard, or it was free or whatever, we had it. And we're like, yeah, why not? Let's watch it. And to quote the great Danny DeVito,
I get it.
And what I saw that day was maybe the most hilariously amazing, brilliantly badass, ingeniously beautiful adventure film I had ever seen in my life. So I want to talk about it. And that, ladies and gentlemen, brings us to Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl. As I hinted at earlier, one of the biggest misconceptions of this film, which is also part of the reason 4 and 5 aren't liked as much, is that Jack Sparrow is not the center of this film, and he's certainly not the center of the story. Instead, the story is about Will Turner, a blacksmith's apprentice who was found drifting at sea after his ship was set upon by a ghostly ship with black sails, and he was saved by the King's Navy and Elizabeth Swann when she was 10 or 11 or whatever she was in the prologue of this film. And that's our other lead of the movie. It's the story of those 2 people. And Elizabeth finds this pirate-looking medallion with Will, and upon grabbing it, also finds a ship in the fog, a ghost ship. It's terrifying. Its sails are tattered. It is completely shaded in just black all the way down. And if you haven't already picked up on it, that is our titular ship. And after Elizabeth spots the Black Pearl in the fog, not knowing what it is yet, the film cuts forward 8 years in time to Keira Knightley, who is playing an 18-year-old Elizabeth Swann. And funny enough, that's actually the age that Keira Knightley was when the film released. She was 17 when they filmed it, and if you want to know a weird fun fact that'll change your perception of this film, Orlando Bloom was 25. So now you get to live with that information for the rest of your lives. But these are our 2 leads of the film, and we meet them very early on. The next 2 scenes of this film are just bringing them into the story and bringing them together. It's the story of a boy and a girl and the romance that forms because of it. And Jack Sparrow's not the lead. He's just a very prominent character who is essentially the catalyst for this romance to happen. So when people say that Jack Sparrow is the lead of this movie, I don't know what cut of the movie they watched, because in this version of the movie, the one I've been watching my entire life, he's very much not the lead of the film. So Elizabeth is the daughter of the governor of Port Royal, and we're introduced to him very quickly. Just sweet little innocent man who doesn't realize the shit that's happening around him. And he's here to wake up Elizabeth because Captain James Norrington of the Royal Navy is being promoted to Commodore, and in addition, he wants to marry Elizabeth because it's that time where both of them should be getting married. Different time in history, people. And so Elizabeth has to get ready for that in a dress that is way too tight and makes it very difficult for her to breathe. This is foreshadowing, by the way, and there's a lot of it in this movie, so get ready. This movie immediately, within the first 7 minutes or whatever, immediately shows the class difference that exists in this world. So Will Turner comes to drop off Norrington's sword so that the governor can present it to him. And Will's a blacksmith, and he shows up looking as nice as he can. He's in the governor's mansion, and he's kind of uneasy in this setting. He's just waiting in the lobby. He doesn't really know how to just act. He is used to being in the mud and the dirt and the sweat and just the streets all day working in this blacksmith shop, whereas Elizabeth is used to this extravagant, orderly life where everything is so pompous. And their outfits even reflect that. You know, Will is dressed the best he can be, but then you see Elizabeth just sitting there like someone descending from heaven at the top of the steps. I appreciate that this film didn't waste any time putting Will and Elizabeth in the same room together. They just got right to it, and they both want to get into each other's pants so badly, but they know because of how they were brought up that's just not a thing they're allowed to do because of how society works, and they just both have to live with the fact that they can't be together. And that aspect is one of the pillars of this story of this film that makes it work so well. And thankfully, the film wastes no time with that. Less than 10 minutes into the movie, the romance aspect has already been introduced and already set in motion so that the film does not have to waste any time and can get straight into the greatest character introduction of all time. The amount of absolute tomfoolery that happens in this one short scene alone is not only amazing, but it also tells us everything we need to know about Jack Sparrow in one scene. There is an epic sweeping shot of Jack Sparrow standing atop the mast of a ship looking into the distance as the music swells and you get this heroic vibe from him. And then the camera pulls out to reveal that it's a dinghy. And to make it even better, the dinghy is sinking. And all Jack has to deal with it is a tiny little bucket. He also doesn't realize initially that his dinghy is sinking. He's just so oblivious to it. And while he's dumping water out of his boat, he passes by a group of skeletons who you can figure out were pirates and were hanged, and he salutes them to show the honor that there is among pirates. And then everyone watches him come into port, and it makes it seem like he's doing something cool, but when we cut back to Jack, the dinghy is still sinking, but he has adjusted his current predicament and figured out how to make it work for him. So he stands atop the dinghy, and by the time it finally sinks, he's at the dock and he can just step onto the dock. And to make that even better, the first thing he does upon landing in Port Royal is negotiate with the dock keeper to keep his anonymity and then steal some shit. Because why not? And it's a hard battle they had to fight, because when the writers got this task, they had to figure out how to make pirates likable, because if you know anything about history, pirates as they're depicted in fiction, that's not accurate to how pirates were, really. Like, yes, they had an honor system, they had a code, but also not really the good guys in history, and this movie had to frame them as that. And in this one scene, you fall in love with Jack Sparrow immediately. You love this guy. He's only said a few things, his boat has sunk, and he has stolen stuff. But he's already so charming and so endearing, and you love Jack Sparrow so much. And this carries on through all of these films, and it's because of how this first act in this film sets him up. It is maybe one of the most difficult writing tasks anyone has had to do, and they pulled it off. But even though we learn most of what we need to know about Jack prior, of how quick he is on his feet and how quick he can think of a plan, and also just how good of a pirate he is, all without him barely saying or doing anything, the entire sequence leading up to his arrest basically serves as an introduction to his character, because we get the legend of the Black Pearl right after this, and then we get to see the first of many Jack Sparrow escape sequences. In the scene in which Jack explains the legend of the Black Pearl is exposition done right, because it's not an info dump so much as something that is world building and character building. So Jack mentions the Black Pearl to rile up the soldiers because he wants to get the interceptor that they're guarding. It's a fast ship. He needs it. He learns that it's a fast ship. And so now he's gonna go after it. And so he mentions the pearl so that they get on edge. And then they just start bickering about it, and the two soldiers start arguing with each other. And it turns into them mentioning the legend over and over to each other to point out how dumb it is. And what this does is it tells the audience how terrifying this ship is. That the entire Caribbean, the entirety of Port Royal, is familiar with this ship, and they're kind of scared of it, and it's this giant legend that people don't know if they believe in or not, but it scares them nonetheless. But instead of just explaining this to the audience, it's masked through very believable dialogue. This feels like an argument people would have, and I know that because this is an argument I've had before. I've had arguments that go just like this. And so it just feels like a natural thing that's happening. And then Jack, using his cleverness as a weapon, realizes that they're not paying attention to him anymore, and uses that as a way to get on the interceptor. And when they catch him, guess what he does? He just starts talking and makes some friends. And to add even more to how much they've already established with Jack, when they ask him what he's doing, he tells the truth. He tells them exactly what he's doing, revealing he doesn't really lie all that often. But back to Elizabeth, because it's an essential storyline in this movie, and by essential storyline I mean it's the reason there's a storyline in this movie at all, so I should probably keep up with that. And right after Norrington is promoted to Commodore and he's the hot shot now, he decides he's going to propose to Elizabeth, and in this proposal, she is out of breath because her corset is too tight, and she falls off the side of the fort into the water, and you see the medallion just give a little pulse, and it's sending out something that you can heavily imply to be a signal of some kind. And this is where they bring these two things we have seen together. So we've seen Elizabeth's introduction and we've seen Jack's introduction, and so the next thing the movie does is blend them together, because Jack is the one who dives in to save Elizabeth because he's a genuinely good guy. Yeah, he cares about himself, but he also cares about others a fair bit too. He just doesn't really show it as much. But he dives in to save Elizabeth, and just as he gets out of the water, who gets there? Everyone else. And again, this is exposition done the right way, because this is where we learn a bit about Jack and his equipment in what is essentially a moment where Norrington is info dumping it, but he's saying it to make fun of Jack by pointing out all of the dumb stuff Jack has. So he calls him out for being a pirate immediately, identifies him as Jack Sparrow, pointing out people may have heard his name before. People might know who Jack Sparrow is. He has a lame sword, he has a compass that doesn't point north, and he has a pistol that only has one shot in it. Now this sword, him calling out the sword is just to be mean to Jack. But it's funny because that sword gets Jack out of a lot of situations. But the compass and the pistol are, say it with me, foreshadowing. And not even necessarily just to this film. The pistol is, but the compass is just foreshadowing for really the series as a whole of just how important that device is. And he does all this while also sussing out his escape. So this is a major pillar of Jack Sparrow's character, is he'll always seem like he's in a bind. He'll always seem like he's in a seemingly inescapable situation. And he always finds a way out of it. While everything is ensuing, he is figuring out how he's going to escape the situation he's in. And for the first time on screen, Jack Sparrow delivers his iconic getaway line.
You will always remember this as the day that you almost caught Captain Jack Sparrow.
And the way he gets out of this is great. So let's do a breakdown of the way he gets out of this. So he acts helpless around Norrington until Elizabeth steps in. And this is where he immediately susses out exactly how he's going to get out of this bind. So Elizabeth steps in to defend Jack while they're handcuffing Jack. And Jack is so focused on what's going on, and he's acting like a drunk idiot this entire time so that people think he's harmless. And then the moment the cuffs are on him, first thing he does is put it around Elizabeth so that way he has her as a prisoner, and now he has all the bargaining power. But he in no way intends to hurt Elizabeth, because that's not who he is. He doesn't hurt innocent people like that. But he uses this as a way to get all of his stuff back. His compass, his gun, his sword, his hat especially. He emphasizes the hat, that he wants that back. And this is really all as a time saver, because he needs to buy himself some more time to get into position. So still using Elizabeth, because it means no one will shoot him, he backs up to a little rope that is holding a cannon. And so he lets go of Elizabeth and throws her into Norrington and the soldiers, so that way it gives him just a big enough window to grab that rope and kick himself up using the counterweight of the cannon, which sends the cannon through the ground and several of the soldiers into it, so now they're disoriented and they can't shoot him right away. And then while he's swinging around, they're shooting at him, wasting all their ammo, and then when they're done with that, what does Jack do? He ziplines back down to the ground, runs away, and takes cover. And it's amazing. It's a situation that should be impossible to get out of. No one could get out of that situation except for Jack Sparrow. And what's crazy is this is not even one of his coolest escapes in the series. Wait until we get to On Stranger Tides. But it brings him face to face with Will Turner so they can connect all of that together. And while the ensuing sword fight is not my favorite of the franchise, it might be the most well-crafted just from a sword fighting standpoint. And it also reinforces the main goal of these movies: to have fun. Everything about this is fun. The donkey being scared of fire because Jack poked it earlier and immediately getting to work once Will grabs the blade out of the fire. Will having a seemingly endless supply of swords and just always restocking, which, quick tangent, also shows how attached Jack is to his sword, because he always uses just his one sword during the fight, whereas Will is changing weapons and changing up his style and stuff like that. But Jack sticks with what he knows. And then you have Jack and Will, it seems like they're just having more fun messing with each other than actually fighting, especially Jack. You have the catapult to the ceiling, which is not realistic in any way, at least not to the degree they did it, as far as I know. I don't know physics, but it does not seem realistic. But who cares, because the movie makes you believe it's possible, and that's all that matters. Will throwing his sword with pinpoint accuracy into the door to lock it. Like, every second of it is so exciting and so entertaining that I don't even care if it's realistic. I don't even know if it's realistic. Why would I look it up? It's more fun than it has any right to be. But it also establishes so much about these characters. Jack is saving this one shot in his pistol for someone. As he mentions, it's not meant for Will. But Will, still at gunpoint, puts himself between Jack and the door because he knows they need to catch this pirate. And he could get killed doing this, but it's his stance. And it's foreshadowing for later when Will stands between someone else and Jack once again. Let's talk about pacing. At the end of the day, this movie's main goal, beyond anything, is to sell theme park tickets. And you forget that because the movie's good. But that's corporate greed for you. That's why the movie was made. Which means it's marketed towards, you guessed it, children. And even though this movie can be scary as shit when you're a kid, there's a simple rule when it comes to making a movie for children. They get bored very easily. Meaning you need to keep the excitement up, or else the kid's not going to want to watch the movie. So let's take a look at how this movie has gone so far in the pacing department. 1, an exciting hook that sets up a scary idea. Pirates are kind of mean. 2, the introduction of Will and Elizabeth in a very short romantic scene so the kids don't get bored because romance is boring, am I right? 3, Jack comes into town and we essentially follow the pirate man for like 10 minutes. And he's just fun, he's funny, he's entertaining. Why wouldn't you want to watch that nonstop? 4, Jack escapes and there's a fun chase scene. And 5, he has a sword duel with Will Turner. Everything has been exciting so far, and the one time that the movie had to slow down to establish something, it first did it in a very natural way, and 2, kept it short so we can get back to the cool pirate man. Constantly moving on to the next thing, and it escalates. Instead of Jack escaping and then moving on to something calm after that, a conversation, whatever, it escalates from a chase into a fight scene. The plot is constantly moving and escalating to keep you on the edge of your seat. And guess what? It works. Because rewatching this movie, there was not a single moment where I was like, I can stop and get up and take a break. No, like, I was in it. I was in it the entire time. And then after that fight, everything can go back to normal. So Jack's arrested, he's put in prison. He's pretty calm while all these other prisoners are kind of freaking out and want to get out of there. But Jack's he's just chilling. And then, Will goes back to his shop. The Royal Navy goes back to what they're doing because they're used to this. This is just a thing that happens. This is all in a day's work for them. And then Elizabeth's maids are getting her ready for bed. We see kind of the day-to-day operations of Port Royal when there's not anything crazy happening. But since we've had that break and we've seen that and we've seen how the characters reacted and responded to that situation, the movie then can escalate more and get into the next thing. But the movie doesn't want to waste any time. It wants to just show you the ship the movie is named after. And so the Black Pearl sails up into Port Royal and just starts wreaking havoc in search of Elizabeth's medallion. We have no clue why they want it, but we just know that they want it. There are a few things I really adore about this scene. First off, Jack hears the guns, goes to the window, and from a distance is able to realize that that is the Black Pearl. And it cues the audience to recognize that Jack has a past. He's not new to this. He's been at piracy a long time. He's sort of a veteran at this. He knows what he's doing. And he is familiar with this ship and he's in awe of it, even while it's destroying this fort and this town and hurting all these innocent people. I also love the way in which they reveal that the crew of the Black Pearl is immortal, because they don't show them waking up or walking off an injury or something. But we see Will fight the same pirate twice. and he's surprised about that, which lets the audience know they need to be surprised about this. And if you've been paying attention, you'll realize he fought the same pirate 2 times. And lastly, Elizabeth is not some damsel in distress. Sure, they're on a rescue mission to get her for a lot of this movie, but they show here how capable and strong she is on her own. And granted, it didn't work out well for her in this scene, but she can kind of figure out a sticky situation, figure out how to hold her own to the best of her ability. If you asked me who my favorite character was in this film, I would say Barbosa. But if you asked me who my second favorite character was in this film, I would probably say Elizabeth. As if she's not already smart and brave enough, she also has the bravery of a goddamn superhero, because every time Barbosa gives her shit, she gives it right back. She also threatens to drop the medallion in the ocean and greatly enjoys the reaction that the entire crew of the Pearl has, but she's almost too clever, because she thinks they're at Port Royal for her, and so she gives up a fake name and says she's Elizabeth Turner. And Barbosa has a certain reaction to the name Turner that leads them to take Elizabeth with them. We don't know why they're taking her, we don't know what the significance of Turner is, but we know there's a Turner in the movie, and we know they have Elizabeth. And thus begins our adventure. William Turner is in love. That's a given. Norrington does not want Will going after Elizabeth because he's a blacksmith and Will is very rash. Something Norrington is 100% in the right about. But Will gets upset, and because they're not letting him go with them, Will turns to Jack Sparrow because Jack is familiar with the ship, and also he knows Jack can get them out of there. And so Jack agrees. Will frees him by saying that he built the cells and they're half-pin barrel hinges, and if you just apply enough leverage, the gate will come off. Something that is going to be so important in 2 movies that you guys better remember it. And so now Jack has to commandeer a ship, and this is the payoff to that scene that we saw earlier with Murtaugh and Mulroy, which are the names of the 2 soldiers. God, I'm a nerd. They said the Interceptor's the fastest, Jack said the Pearl is faster, and that led to a debate on if the Pearl is real or not. Now we have seen the Black Pearl, so we know it's real, which means it's probably the fastest ship. So Jack and Will need the fastest ship they can get to keep up with it because they have to follow the Pearl, which means Jack has to commandeer the Interceptor. And just the sheer unhinged comedy of these 2 guys taking the Interceptor. Will steps in some sort of trap. I don't know if it's a crab trap or what, but he steps in it, drags it along, and then the plan consists of stealing the Dauntless because the Dauntless is all ready to sail. And then once they realize the Dauntless is being commandeered, everyone will get on the Interceptor, pull up to the Dauntless, and then Jack and will just hop over to the Dauntless and start sailing, and they have to do no work to set the ship up. And after a quick little expositional scene about Will and his father, and that Will knows Jack only came because he heard the name Will Turner and something registered with Jack. So we've now learned that both of our pirate captains in this movie want Turner. But after that, we get straight to the cool stuff in this movie. Talk about world building, because we have seen so many different walks of life already in this movie. We've seen what it's like to be on a Royal Navy ship, just the order that comes with that. We've seen what Port Royal looks like in the different classes between living in the streets like Will does and then living in the mansion and the fort like Elizabeth and Norrington and the governor do. And then we saw what it was like to live on just a ghostly pirate ship and just the filth and the chaos. And now we get to see what a pirate town looks like. Tortuga is a pirate port. The entire town is a pirate city, and it may be one of my favorite places in all of fiction, because it's so weird, and it's so dumb, and it's so chaotic, and even though there's just fights breaking out all the time, and it feels like you could die at any second, Tortuga feels so homey. Also, My favorite running gag in the franchise.
Not sure I deserve that.
Who was she?
What? I may have deserved that.
And holy shit, is Tortuga just the weirdest place on planet Earth. Everything is chaotic. There are fights everywhere. People don't care. People are getting killed. Everything is so random. It makes the Mos Eisley Cantina look like a high-end restaurant. And once again, it illustrates the difference between Will and Jack, because Will's shy. He doesn't really know what's up here. He's not really vibing with this. But Jack feels right at home, and he loves Tortuga, and he's so happy to be back in Tortuga. It may also have, well, Jones's is pretty good, but it has one of the best themes in this series. Just, it is so fun, and it fits with the vibe of Tortuga so well, and every time that theme plays, I get so happy. And then we're introduced to everyone's first mate, Joshua Gibbs, who is sleeping with some pigs, and then Jack buys him a drink, and is once again reinforced that Will may be pretty important in the pirate world, because just like Jack and Barbosa before him, Gibbs has a very strong reaction to hearing Will's last name, or more specifically, that Will is the son of a man named Bootstrap Bill Turner, who is going to go on to be one of the best characters, maybe ever. But we don't meet him in this movie, so keep waiting. However, as I mentioned, this was not intended to be a trilogy originally. This was a one-off film, meaning everything is tied up. So we learn everything we need to know about Bootstrap Bill for the context of this story in this movie. He's just fleshed out and brought into the sequels to show how broken and damaged he is and give Will more conflict. I'm going to go back to the dinner scene, because the dinner scene with Elizabeth and Barbosa might be one of the most important scenes in the film, but I want to talk about Jack's crew, because this is amazing, and I love this. There's no big assembly scene where they're getting all the pirates together. They're in a pirate town. Gibbs says he's going to find a crew, and we cut back to said pirate town, and Gibbs has found just the biggest ragtag group of losers you could ever meet. There is a guy missing his tongue who has a parrot that speaks for him. There's a dude named Marty who's one of my favorite members of the crew. And then there's Neytiri. Nope. Anna Maria.
I suppose you didn't deserve that one either.
No, that one I deserve.
But this is another example of how alive this world is. These characters don't feel like they came into this scene purely because this is where the story had them starting. It feels like they all had stories before this. It feels like Cotton and his parrot have had adventures before this. It feels like Jack and Anna Maria have history. Gibbs said he would get a crew. Gibbs went and just found some people that are in the world. Their stories did not begin here. Another place you see this is in that first scene on the Black Pearl between Barbosa and Elizabeth. Something that when you're little is just scary as shit. But Barbosa has this expository scene explaining why they do what they do. And it makes you realize Barbosa's not really evil. He's not the super all-evil villain that we thought he was initially. He's just a guy in this world who has an agenda. But Barbosa is a victim of greed, and he's trying to fix what he did wrong. He stole a bunch of gold because he felt like it, cursed the entire crew, and is now going around the world trying to find all the gold again that they sold off so that they can break the curse and not be like this anymore. They are immortal. They cannot go into the moonlight without turning into skeletons. They cannot really taste food or drink. Barbosa mentions that he wants to eat an apple. First thing he does when the curse is lifted, and it's a recurring thing throughout the film. And he says this because he loves apples. But every time he eats one, it essentially tastes like ash. And all he wants, he just wants an apple. And what's crazy is that later in the movie, we learn that the reason they're stuck with this curse is because Bootstrap sent a piece of the treasure off with Will and ensured they would be cursed because of everything they had done and the fact they mutinied against the Pearl's true captain, Jack Sparrow. And then they killed Bootstrap for it, and after killing him realized they need the blood of a Turner to break the curse, and now they're looking for someone who can do it. And then they realize, well, they think Elizabeth is the one when Will's really the one, and it gives them this newfound hope that they can break the curse. And the best part is, we do not see any of this. I have said my dream Pirates movie is a prequel involving Jack Davy Jones Beckett and Barbosa that highlights all this history they have and the sinking of the Pearl and the curses that came from that and really everything that kickstarted this series. But the fact that we don't see it does make this world feel that much more alive. Again, people did stuff before this. Their stories started before this movie. They did not start once the story starts. And by doing this, it also makes the reveal of Bootstrap Bill hit that much harder in Dead Man's Chest, because all we do is hear about him, and then you finally see him in the second movie, and it is horrifying. And as mentioned, that's why they have Elizabeth. They think she has the blood of Bootstrap Bill, and that if they use her blood, they can break the curse. But then we're shown what this curse does to someone physically, and it is less than pretty. Elizabeth tries to escape Barbosa, ends up on the deck of the Black Pearl, the moon's out, and she just sees a bunch of skeleton pirates. They're kind of undead looking. They're kind of like zombies, just a bunch of skeletons walking around the deck that cannot die. One of them gets their neck broken, he just pops his head right back up. And even though they don't feel pain, you get this sense of just how tortured they seem and how they really don't want to be cursed like this and how their whole mission is just to be free of that. And that's something that comes full circle in the ending of this film, and part of the reason that I think the third act of this movie is as beautiful as it is. And it scares the crap out of Elizabeth, because why wouldn't it? And while it does so much to establish everything that's happening with the Black Pearl, it also scares the audience into realizing how dangerous this situation is for Elizabeth, and it makes you want Will and Jack to rescue her that much quicker. It provides stakes and a timetable into the story. And because we've established that this movie is a masterclass in how to give information to the audience, I'm going to talk briefly about a pair of scenes that do this brilliantly. Editing John here. So originally the first scene I was going to mention was the storm when Jack is helming the Interceptor and we learn that his compass probably points to what you want most. But obviously you can tell that footage doesn't exist, so I'm just mentioning it here. The second scene is when they're sailing through that ship graveyard in which they name drop the title of the fifth film. Gibbs mentions that Jack may not have always been like this, and that there was a mutiny and they left Jack to die on an island with a pistol that has one shot in it. Foreshadowing, by the way, to the fact that Jack's pistol only has one shot in it. And he mentions that the way Jack escaped was by roping sea turtles and making a raft. And if this story sounds really strange, well, Will also raises that concern. And just as you're like, am I getting some answers? Jack comes in and says the way he escaped, or the way he made rope, was by using human hair from his back. And you realize right then as an audience member, it's all bullshit. And that's perfect. Right as you think you're going to learn about Jack, they shroud him even deeper in mystery. What a way to handle a character, honestly. But these scenes, and the ones with Will and Jack before it, exist to establish the relationship between the two as quick as they can, because we're about to have a double cross. Because part of Will and Elizabeth's arc in this movie is that despite the fact that they hate pirates with a passion, they both sort of act like pirates to complete this mission. An arc that carries through the entire trilogy to just craft what is, in my opinion, the greatest love story in all of fiction, but we'll talk a lot more about that when we get to my video on At World's End. So right before Jack and Will get off the Interceptor to go into Isla de Muerta to save Elizabeth, Jack mentions keeping to the Pirate's Code if someone falls behind. And quick tangent, for anyone who thinks that a pirate's code is incredibly stupid, wait until you learn that the Pirate's Code was a real thing that existed, and just like in the movies, they only stuck to it when it benefited them. But Will learns from Jack that the particular portion of the code that's being mentioned here is any man who falls behind is left behind. Foreshadowing for the inevitable arc that we're gonna get related to this, but Will sticks to that pretty closely, because like I said, it benefits him. Pirate. Barbosa cuts Elizabeth's hand, nothing happens, the curse is still there, and then Will comes in and saves Elizabeth, gets back on the Interceptor and gets out of there, but not before Barbosa and crew capture Jack and get on the Interceptor's trail. Because they need their medallion back. They still don't have the medallion. And they kind of need that, so it's imperative that they get to the Interceptor. Yeah, we're setting up for a ship battle, by the way. I'm so excited. The Interceptor versus the Black Pearl is the worst ship battle in the franchise, and it's not bad by any means. The problem is that the third film set the bar pretty darn high with a maelstrom, so every ship battle is just going to be boring in comparison to that. But I do love that this is just the most straightforward ship battle. No superpowered ships, no intervening gods, just two ships shooting at each other, trying to kill each other. I love when heroes lose the fight, and this is a perfect example of that. And they don't even barely lose. I mean, this is a royal ass whooping. The entire crew of the Interceptor is taken hostage. The Interceptor is blown up. And because Will sucks at negotiating, the crew of the Pearl both keep Will and they make Jack and Elizabeth walk the plank. And while this is not the final battle at all, we're not even at the third act of the movie yet, this serves sort of as the main set piece of the film. We get to see just how smart Elizabeth is in a tight situation, how much of a hero Will is, and then just how imposing the Black Pearl is. We also get to see how great Jack is at keeping his composure in a bad situation. Something that makes the first act of Dead Man's Chest so strong. Cannot wait to get to the sequels. And on top of that, we get a fun action sequence to boot. Also, just the comedy. Gibbs's flask getting shot through a cannon, a fork landing in Righetti's wooden eye. Like, it's just so fun. Again, this movie's just trying to be fun. But back to what I was saying about walking the plank, Jack and Elizabeth have to walk the plank. And Ted Elliott and Terry Rossio, who were the writers of the first 4 films in this franchise, do something very clever. They like repeating events. They like taking things that have happened or have been alluded to and making the characters go through that again. So, the same island that Jack is marooned on is the island he was marooned on the first time after the mutiny was committed against him. And they use this as a fun way to give Jack some backstory and really flesh out his character more. But one question: did they keep the crew hostage and then sail to the island? Or did they just happen to be by the island purely by coincidence? Because there's no island nearby when the two ships are fighting. However, it also looks like they walked the plank immediately after the battle ends. So what's up with that? What's the timeline of the ship battle as opposed to walking the plank? Answer this for me, please. But Elizabeth is basically forced into the water, and then Jack jumps in because Barbosa throws his effects in, including, but not limited to, his pistol, which the movie once again reminds us only has one shot. And they confirm that Jack was full of shit with the way he got off the island because there were no sea turtles. At least that's how it sounds. He just sat on the island drinking rum until someone came by and scooped him up. He was just vibing. But even then, we don't know everything. We only know some of it. They kept him mysterious. That's the best thing you can do for Jack. The less we know about Jack, the better. But then we get to what is easily, without question, the best scene in the film, and maybe even one of the best scenes in the franchise. Elizabeth says screw it, and decides to drink some rum with Jack. And there's this little look when Elizabeth finally accepts the bottle, where you can see that she's learning a bit from Jack, and she's gonna make this work in her favor. She's developing her pirate tendencies already. I love her so much. Anyway, it's late at night, they have a fire, and they're singing, and they're kind of drunk. This is at least what you can infer. And Jack exclaims that when he gets his ship back, because we know it's his ship at this point, he's going to sing A Pirate's Life for Me and teach it to the entire crew. And there's a back and forth between Jack and Elizabeth about being a fearsome pirate, and it leads to the best line in the movie, and it's not even close.
What the Black Pearl really is freedom.
And so there's your main theme of the film, by the way. Freedom. That's the main message they're going for here. Everything revolves around freedom, trying to get freedom, or someone trying to take freedom away. And this is really kind of the theme of the series as a whole, at least of the trilogy mainly. That's sort of the main message of it, but it's all laid out right here on this beach. First of all, it explains why Jack loves his ship so much. It gives him a sense of freedom. Jack Sparrow versus the world, that's what he likes. And with the pearl being gone and in Barbosa's hands, it makes it feel like his freedom has been taken from him, and he wants that back. He misses that aspect of the horizon. Then you have Elizabeth, who wants freedom from the system, and we see that with how she's kind of embedding herself into this pirate mentality throughout this film, where she's just, that's not her. That whole life of order and Port Royal and all that that's not Elizabeth. She much more should be with a group of freedom-loving people, which is what Jack and the crew is. And then you have Barbosa and the entire crew of the Black Pearl, which, by the way, the Black Pearl, formerly a sign of freedom, now a sign of enslavement, because you have this crew on there who is cursed to an eternal life of essentially pain. They can't eat, they can't drink, they can't enjoy their time. They're just stuck like this forever, and they want to be free of it, and that is the personification of wanting freedom. And that's the poetry of the Black Pearl. That is the curse of the Black Pearl. The Black Pearl should be a symbol of what it means to be free, as Jack likes it. But with it in the hands of Barbosa being cursed, it is their prison, and it's the sign of their curse. And they cannot be on the Pearl, or do anything for that matter, without constantly being reminded of it. I'm going to tell you guys a story real quick. So years ago, and at this point it was probably 10, 11 years ago when this was, I was watching Curse of the Black Pearl. Now, my grandmother hates violent movies. She will not watch action movies. She hated Star Wars. She just doesn't like James Bond. Doesn't like anything with action. However, she happened to be in the room while I was watching Curse of the Black Pearl, and she was doing whatever, sewing, ironing, whatever it is grandmothers do. And never in my life have I heard a person laugh quite as hard as she did when Jack contemplated shooting Elizabeth because she burned the rum. But in regards to the rum burning, my story aside, It is the payoff to Elizabeth, and it is also the confirmation of just how smart she is at getting out of this. She's kind of like Jack's little apprentice. So she deduced that the entire Royal Navy is after Jack. Because Jack has Will, they're also looking for Elizabeth because they need Elizabeth back. And Jack's also a very wanted man. So what you have now is 3 people who the Royal Navy is looking for. And Elizabeth realizes that if she just burns everything on the island, it'll cause a massive signal fire that a ship will have to come investigate. And as pissed off as Jack is, Elizabeth is right. And the Dauntless pulls up to get them both. They arrest Jack, they take Elizabeth, and yeah, Will's still on the Pearl. But there is more to this insanely intricate plan, because then Elizabeth deduces that they can go save Will, because now they have a little army. And she says if they go save Will, she'll marry Norrington. What a pirate, Elizabeth. What a pirate indeed. No wonder Jack voted you king of the Brethren Court. We gotta break down the third act of this movie. One thing being Jack's just next level genius plan to get what he wants. It's so complicated and it's so Jack Sparrow, and it works. And Jack tries to sell this plan to both Norrington and Barbosa, and neither of them truly fall for it. But neither of them see what Jack is actually doing, and they don't see how they're playing right into what he wants. So Barbosa sent his entire crew to go deal with Norrington's men. Not doing it the way Jack wanted, but whatever. He did it. Jack still has the ace up his sleeve. And Jack has used Will as leverage now, as a bargaining chip with Barbosa, so that he can negotiate his way into getting his ship back. He also, during this negotiation with Barbosa, pocketed one of the pieces of gold. Something is up, not all is as it seems. Jack is up to something. And this is where it's abundantly clear what Jack's plan is. Because the crew of the Pearl is now no longer at the Pearl. And Barbosa is now isolated, which is all Jack needed. He needed Barbosa and the Pearl completely isolated so that he can carry out his actual plan, because there's no way he can take on a whole crew of people. But by isolating Barbosa, he can fight Barbosa, and there's no one to watch over the Pearl. What a genius Jack Sparrow is. Truly the great genius of fiction. I adore this fight, but I find it hilarious that Jack does one of the most petty things he has ever done, just because he can. Not the most petty, but one of the most petty. So Jack is well aware that Barbosa would like for the curse to be broken. And Jack, knowing this, pockets one of the pieces of gold so that the curse can keep going. And his reasoning, when he mentions it to Barbosa, is that he couldn't help himself. What an asshole. I love him. And all this ends by Will cutting his hand. Jack throws his piece of gold to Will. Barbosa points his gun at Elizabeth, and just then we hear a gunshot. But it's not Barbosa's gunshot. We finally get closure on why Jack has been carrying a pistol with one shot around for 10 years without getting more rounds. He was saving it to use on Barbosa. What a petty little shit. I love him so damn much. And like I said, them wanting to get rid of the curse comes full circle, because it's actually quite heartbreaking to see all of these pirates who hated their immortality now looking up at the moon, realizing they're losing the fight, and wishing so hard they could have that back. I have not spoken about the music yet, because I think this is the best time to mention it. Because the music, when the curse is broken is haunting. Now, while Hans Zimmer did 2, 3, and 4, he did not do the first one. Apparently, he was under some sort of obligation with... God, what movie was he doing at the time? Was it Gladiator? No, Gladiator was earlier. Whatever movie he was doing at the time, he could not compose this movie, but he really wanted this movie. So he did not do this one, and instead Klaus Badelt did this one. There is an urban legend, though, that Hans Zimmer stayed up all night, wrote the main theme of this film, sent it to Klaus Badelt, and said, "Here, put your name on this, do whatever you want with it, and compose everything else for the movie. Just do that for me." And that's what the legend is. But the music in this movie, I mean just everything, the Pearl's theme, Jack's theme, the haunting theme that's played when the curse is broken, that chant on the deck of the ship when Elizabeth is seeing the curse, Tortuga, like every theme in this movie is so good. And it only gets better, by the way, because 2 and 3, especially 3, has one of my favorite film scores of all time. But you cannot talk about a Pirates of the Caribbean film without pointing out how amazing the music is. And back to what's happening on the screen, the irony of Barbosa dropping that apple. He didn't get his apple. And then his last words are just so bittersweet. He finally got to feel something, but it comes in death. And although Barbosa comes back and goes on to be one of the best parts of all of these movies, his death here is so perfect and so fitting, and you feel something when Barbosa dies. You just feel the sense, you're like, oh man, Barbosa died. Like, he's the bad guy, he's evil, I didn't like him, but kind of sad. And that is, in my opinion, the beauty of all of the characters in these movies, is just how rich and complex they are. Yeah, Barbosa's the villain, but he was a tortured soul who lost his way because of greed. And because he was too far gone, they had to kill him for it. I love Barbosa so much. He is legitimately one of the best characters in these films. The way it goes is it's Davy Jones, it's Barbosa. But in any movie Davy Jones isn't in, it's Barbosa. And that is Jack Sparrow. And while the fight is over and Norrington and the Dauntless won and the Pearl is back in the hands of the crew, Jack doesn't have the Pearl. They sailed away. And so now Will has to go back to his boring life. Elizabeth has to marry Norrington, and not only does Jack not have a ship and a crew, he's also being sentenced to death. So it's a pretty sad ending for everyone. And I really appreciate that they did that. But lucky for us, the movie's not over yet, and Will has a plan. So Jack is at the gallows about to be hanged, and again, I love that the world goes beyond this movie. The list of Jack's crimes doesn't just consist of what he did in this movie. It consists of stuff he did before it that just sounds amazing, and I would love to see it someday, but it's okay if I don't. I'm very happy with how this all turns out. So this works in a few steps. First of all, Will sees Cotton's parrot and realizes he has allies nearby, but he can't get his hopes up. He still knows he's going to very much be on his own for this fight. So he goes up to Elizabeth and confesses his love to Elizabeth, even though he's in front of everyone and in front of Elizabeth's fiance, and it's kind of awkward. He knows this might not go well, and he might be hanged for helping a pirate, so he might as well say how he feels now. Then he moves towards the gallows, and this is where everyone starts to piece together what he's doing. And Norrington is ready to order the men to get Will, but Elizabeth, being the genius she is, immediately picks up on this, and she remembered that last time she fainted, everyone stopped what they were doing to assist her. So she fake faints, so that way Norrington and the governor will stop focusing on Will to realize they need to help Elizabeth. And that gives Will just enough time, and as the hangman hits the lever, Will throws his sword in a perfect payoff to last time when he did it at the start of the movie, because we know he's really good at throwing it with pinpoint accuracy. He throws it into the floorboard, and Jack is able to use it to stand on, so that way he doesn't get hung. So he frees Jack, They fight through the fort. They take out a lot of dudes, just the two of them. But they don't make it. And they get cornered by all the redcoats and Norrington. And remember how in his first interaction with Jack, Will put himself between Norrington and Jack. Well, in the final scene here, Will puts himself between Norrington and Jack. But instead of facing Jack, he's now facing Norrington and protecting Jack. What a fucking character arc Will Turner goes on in just this movie. And we have 2 more movies that he's in. And this exchange is just beautiful.
You forget your place, Turner.
It's right here. Between you and Jack.
And no matter how many times they fight, double-cross, and argue throughout these movies, that line always rings true. Such a great bromance between Jack and Will. But then Elizabeth comes in because she also says her place is right where Will is. And then in just like 2 minutes, they send Norrington on a hell of a little mini character arc that sets the stage for him to be one of my favorite characters going forward for the rest of this trilogy. Although I say that about every character. Every character in these movies is my favorite. I cannot pick a favorite. Well, besides Davy Jones. But other than that, I cannot pick a favorite. Commodore James Norrington is not a bad man. He's doing his job. And he's now faced with the realization that he's going to have to hang 3 people, one of which is a pirate, and 2 because they're aiding a pirate. But it's Elizabeth's decision to stand with Will and Jack that makes him realize he needs to let it go. He has better things to do than this. And he also realizes he needs to let Elizabeth go, because there's no point in being with someone who in no way cares about you, and you can both get on with your lives. A lesson learned from Barbie is the Island Princess, by the way. Video coming soon on that. So he lets Jack go. Norrington could not suppress the freedom within Jack, so he just had to take the L and let Jack get on with his day. And as Jack goes into the water, he goes off the same part of it that Elizabeth went off. We see a ship come around the corner, but not just any ship. It's the Black Pearl. Reborn, rebuilt, beautiful again. It looks so much different from when Barbosa was captaining it. And keep in mind, Jack thought the Pearl was stolen. He thought he lost the Pearl again. But alas, his ship came back for him. And then they conclude Will and Elizabeth's arc because Will has to get the girl. Where else would a story like this be going? And Norrington realizes this is where her heart lies. I gotta give up on it. He gets on with his day. And then the governor also has a little bit of a mini arc, because remember, the governor was all gung-ho about Elizabeth, you're this, you don't get to be anything else. And he realizes at the end, if this is what Elizabeth wants, then he's gonna live with that. Every character in this movie is perfect. There's not a bad character. They're all just so good. I love every single one of them. I want to hug every single one of them. I want to meet every single one of them. I love them. I love them. And the fact they gave the governor of Port Royal an arc in this movie. Like, who would have thought that was a thing they were going to do? And so with one line, we get a conclusion, and it ties up everything these characters have learned from Jack. And that one line is...
He's a pirate.
All 3 of our main characters have to embrace piracy to win at the end of the movie. And not like piracy in its most literal sense, but sort of the underlying meaning of piracy, which is freedom. And the people who try to suppress that freedom lose at the end of the movie. And to hammer that point home one more time, we get one final scene with Jack at the end of the movie. It's still crazy to me to think that Johnny Depp improvised the final lines of this film, because they tie into the theme so well, and they just hammer home the movie in a way that you would think was scripted. But alas, it was just Johnny being Johnny, and he just rattled off some lines that could not have been more perfect. So Jack grabs the helm of the Black Pearl, and he says,
Now, bring me that horizon.
and what is the horizon? It's infinite, and it's forever. As long as there is a horizon, there is adventure. And there will always be a horizon, meaning Jack will always have adventure just the way he likes it. And finally, the closing line of the film could not be any better than it is. Jack said the song he was going to sing when he gets the pearl back. And what is the last lines uttered on screen before the credits roll?
Drink up, me hearty yo-ho.
And thus ends a beautiful story and a perfect adventure film. The craziest thing about The Curse of the Black Pearl is it leaves no loose ends. There's no cliffhangers, there's no unanswered questions, zero zilch nada. It is an airtight film. And no, the post-credit scene is not a tease as to what's going to happen next. The post-credit scene is just a joke about the fact that the monkey always survives. I take it back. Jack getting slapped, not the best running gag in this franchise. The damn monkey is. So the craziest part about this whole thing is that they were able to make 2 more movies out of this. But we'll talk about those movies in future videos. But do not worry, guys. I am not stopping after At World's End. I very much so want to talk about On Stranger Tides and Dead Men Tell No Tales. I'm running through the entire franchise, so just be patient. I will be talking about all of them. It's just going to take me a while because these videos take a while to make. And so guys, please, let's have a nice discussion in the comments. What are your thoughts on this movie? Is there anything that I mentioned in this video you haven't thought about? Or is there something you picked up on I forgot to mention? Let me know. Let's get a discourse going. How do you rank the pirate movies? What are your thoughts on the sequels, the franchise, the characters, anything involving Pirates of the Caribbean? And also, if you just enjoyed the video, let me know. It's nice to know that I have people who like what I make because I work really hard on it. Another way you can do that is by leaving a like on this video. And also, I just hit my desk, knocked over my computer, and almost knocked over Optimus Prime. I got too excited. But also, hit the subscribe button. It's completely free, doesn't cost you a thing, and you can get notified when my videos drop and they'll be in your little inbox for you to watch at your earliest convenience. So, with all that out of the way, I will see you on the quest for the heart of Davy Jones.